Tennessee father was arrested for trying to pick up his own kids from school. South Cumberland Elementary, in all its wisdom, decided to institute this ludicrous policy which banned parents from collecting their children from school, forcing the kids to walk out into moving traffic where parents were ordered to wait in their vehicles. Standing up against this patently dangerous policy, father of two Jim Howe calmly asserted his right to take possession of his own children at the end of the school day and was arrested for doing so.
They're walking with me. They're walking with me when school is dismissed.
No, we're not.
Per state law, yes they are.
No.
No, you're really barking up the wrong tree.
You're barking up to the county jail where you go.
It's fine. I've been there before.
Good. You're about to go there again.
That's no problem. You just open yourself up for a lawsuit. Be another one.
Go get your lawsuit. I don't care. You're not intimidating me, Jim.
Nobody's
You're not doing it. I don't
intimidating.
care how many lawyers you I don't care.
I'm not raising my voice. I'm not confrontational. I want my kids.
You're a confrontational.
Nope.
You're starting.
Nope.
Don't go by the school rules. You don't call the sheriff on me. Sheriff has nothing to do with coming
State
to
law,
Board of
state law.
Education.
School's dismissed. Kids go with me.
No.
Please excuse me.
School is out. They will give you your child, but it doesn't say when now, does it?
Tennessee state law says within a reasonable amount of time, that is 15
Put
minutes.
yours behind your back.
Okay, no problem. Go ahead. Open yourself up for a lawsuit.
You either get out of the way of traffic or you're going to jail too. You understand me?
Hang on just a second. I got to get rid of it.
The father has vowed to pursue a lawsuit, and judging by even the local sheriff's reaction, who largely took his side, he's got a very good chance of success. But in most authoritarian societies, the gradual shift towards tyranny is characterized by the state's treatment of your children as their own property. What we're seeing is a collectivist agenda to eviscerate parents' rights and redefine children as belonging to the community. And it's a notion which is being promoted heavily by the mainstream media.
We have never invested as much in public education as we should have because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities.
Schools across America are also telling parents that they need to have a doctor's note in order for their children to be allowed to bring packed lunches.
Line it before news reads, government says parents cannot send lunches with children to school anymore unless they have a doctor's note. Let's go down and read the letter, shall we? And obviously this is a scanned copy or a photographed copy with a handwritten note on top that reads, Mrs. Brooks, please do not send a lunch to school unless a doctor's note is sent with connection with this letter. Thanks. So the form letter reads, Dear parents, I have received word from federal programs preschool pertaining to lunches from home. Parents are to be informed that students can only bring lunches from home if there is a medical condition meriting a specific diet along with a physician's note to that regard. I'm sorry for any inconvenience. If you have any questions concerning this matter, please contact Stephanie, the health coordinator for federal programs preschool. Well, and some of the comment here from the writer, not even a preschooler's lunch can be free from federal control. Health-conscious parents are not allowed to opt their children out of eating the processed, nutritionally deficient, genetically modified garbage food without approval from a doctor. Pink Floyd was right. This parent lives in Richmond, Virginia.
Others are fining parents for not including certain items in packed lunches. Meanwhile, in other major Western countries, children are being assigned a state minder from birth under draconian new proposals that would enable the government to spy on families under the justification of preventing child abuse.
Since the days of William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, Scotland has been known as a land of fiercely independent people, and many of the ideas that led to America's war for independence were cultivated on Scottish soil. Scottish author Stuart Walton, a sociology and criminology professor at the University of Abertay Dundee, warns that his country is now being used to test what he calls a dystopian plan in which every child from birth would be assigned a state guardian who would have the supposed authority to represent the child's interests against his parents. Walton incorporated that idea in a science fiction novel about 10 years ago, and now it has become a reality. Writing in the Scotsman newspaper, Walton points out that under a new social policy initiative, each newborn in Scotland would have a state-appointed overseer to supervise the child's development from birth to age 5.
Officials in Scotland are using hospital snoops and nursery school children to monitor the attitudes of parents regarding diversity. Under an initiative called Getting It Right for Every Child, parents of newborns are secretly monitored by hospital staff to assess their suitability for raising their children. If they are seen as insufficiently progressive in their views, they are given a questionnaire asking whether they respect and value diversity and give suitable prominence to their racial, ethnic and cultural heritage. Nursery school workers are also asking young children to rate their parents on a scale of 1 to 10. The program also seeks to use midwives as the eyes and ears of the government regarding parental attitudes.
Here in Britain today, the social services are complaining that they are overwhelmed because of the sheer number of demands from schools, local authorities and individuals to investigate so-called child abuse.
Child protection services in England are under more pressure than ever, the Association of Directors of Children's Services is warning. The ADCS says tight budgets, increasing demands and heightened media scrutiny put phenomenal pressure on staff. It comes as a survey of frontline social workers suggests the level of need required to get support has risen. The government said social workers were responding to major challenges with skill, passion and sheer hard work. Ever since the death of Peter Connolly in North London in August 2007, there has been increasing demand on child protection officials. Baby P, as Peter became known, died with more than 50 injuries, despite being on a social services at-risk register. The number of looked-after children under the care and supervision of local authorities in England is now higher than at any point in almost 30 years. Thresholds for care. Now a survey of 600 child protection professionals by Community Care suggests 80% believe thresholds have increased over the past year due to council budget cuts and rising numbers of referrals. We will continue to focus on overhauling child protection, cutting red tape and improving the skills and experience of social workers so they can make the right decisions for children. Some 78% of those polled said the threshold needed to get help for a child suffering from neglect has increased, and nearly a third say thresholds for both physical and sexual abuse have risen as well. Other findings suggest 77% said the increased thresholds were due to increased referrals, 71% blamed local authority budget cuts, especially to administrative staff. 73% said they did not feel they had enough support and resources to prevent a child at risk in their area from coming to serious harm. One respondent told the survey, "We were told if you have a teenager on your case who is 14 to 16 years old, then they cannot have child protection plans anymore because they are either deemed capable of voting with their feet or able to self-protect." Another said, "A child disclosed he'd been hit by his father. There were significant injuries to substantiate." The child then confirmed regular abuse. The first time social care became aware of it, a decision was made by higher management to allow the child to stay home, therefore reducing child protection numbers. Councils have a key role to play in looking after children, but it is not a job which we can do alone. David Simmons, Local Government Association. But the Department for Education said the self-selecting survey presents a picture which is simply not true. Ofsted's annual social care report, published last month, showed a 68% rise in the number of children on child protection plans in the 4 years to 2012, a spokesman said. "We will continue to focus on overhauling child protection, cutting red tape and improving the skills and experience of social workers so they can make the right decisions for children." The vast majority of councils are protecting child protection budgets more than other services. Complex needs. Andrew Webb, president of the ADCS, said, "Budget cuts of over £2.7 billion to local government has put a phenomenal amount of pressure on everyone working in local government, but as directors of children's services, We need to ensure that our social workers have the professional confidence and decision-making skills to ensure every child receives the services they need to protect them from harm regardless of their age. As recent high-profile cases have reminded us, children in the 14-16 age group are just as vulnerable to abuse and exploitation as younger children, and proactive work must be undertaken to protect them from coming to harm. David Simmons, chairman of the local government association's Children and Young People Board, said, "Councils are redoubling their efforts to get the right people to ensure that the most vulnerable in our communities are kept safe from harm and to help in developing and supporting newly qualified social workers." Councils have a key role to play in looking after children, but it is not a job which we can do alone, and other local services, such as health services and schools, also play an important role in supporting vulnerable children and their families. Bridget Robb, chief executive of the British Association of Social Workers, said, "The reduction in early intervention services, even their decommissioning by some local authorities, means that more children are being assessed by social care as children in need or due to safeguarding reasons. They often then present with very complex needs. This is putting extra pressure on social workers who in many cases are having to cope with budgetary cuts in their own councils."
But what constitutes child abuse? Well, I had a conversation recently with a teacher who was quite proud of the fact that she called social services on a slightly overweight child because his parents had given him 2 chocolate bars to bring to school. I also had a conversation with a rental property inspector, and again she was very, very proud of the fact that she had grassed up parents to social services because their house was messy. You know, because houses full of kids are renowned for being clean and tidy, aren't they? Here's an idea. Why don't you mind your own damn business? Why are we seeing this predatory inclination to go after our children by people who get some sort of fetishist, authoritarian, self-satisfied kick out of informing on parents? Because it's being driven by a system that makes money out of stealing children. In the US, every time the CPS, Child Protective Services, grabs another child and feeds them into the protective government care system where they are just as, if not more likely to be abused, they receive a bounty of $4,000. That's right. They make money from stealing kids.
Pastor Drake?
Yes.
Now, Pastor, how did you get involved with the whole CPS movement, or the reform CPS movement?
Well, I've been involved for over 20 years. I run a homeless shelter in Buena Park, and so 80% of the people that come through our homeless shelter every year at our church, 80% of them plus are what many folks refer to as dysfunctional family. Divorced, lost the children, having trouble with CPS. So for years, I've worked with CPS very closely. The problem with CPS is that it's a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There are some great CPS workers who are child protective service workers. They want to do what's best for the child. But there's a bunch of them, probably more than half of them, that want to do it because they want to keep their job. They're told in meetings that I have attended, I have heard with my own ears, they're told, "What is your caseload to a particular worker?" And they would say, "Well, I have 5. They'd say, "Well, we're going to terminate your position if you don't get more children, if you don't get more caseload." So they're out looking for cases. Now, once they get a case, if they take the child away and put it in a foster family, CPS gets money. If they adopt the child out, they get money. If they give the child back to the parents, they get no more money. It's a dollar and cents situation.
So the main thing that needs to happen with CPS is they need to stop using financial incentives to take away children from families. They need to just give them a budget and then reevaluate that budget every year, not base it upon how many children they take away.
And not absolutely. What they need to do is they need to get CPS workers that are qualified. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals just heard a case and sent it to the Supreme Court. I'll be in that Supreme Court on the first day of next month to hear that case. They, in their report, Now, the Ninth Circuit, not a bastion of conservatism by any stretch of the imagination, but they said that the average CPS worker is not well trained. Ninth Circuit Court of California, the Western District, said they are ill-trained and they're not trained to do what they do. They're making decisions, psychological decisions, sociological decisions, and they have no training, no education in that.
Now, mom and dad are sitting at home watching this video. They got 3 kids in school. They've never had a problem with anybody. Why should they be concerned?
Well, they should be concerned because that scenario, that mom and dad could have a neighbor that gets mad at them because their dog crapped on their yard, and this is a real story. The guy had 3 children. Him and his wife both worked. They made sure that there was an adult present with them at all times. They took good care of their kids. They had a dog that got out periodically and would crap on his neighbor's lawn. And he crapped on the neighbor's lawn, and him and the neighbor almost got in a fight over it one time. This guy said, I know what I'll do. I'll call Child Protective Services. They called Child Protective Services and said, those people are neglecting their kids. I see them out. They lied. And they came and took the children away from them. They literally took them away from them, and they got them back eventually, but it took them 18 months. 2 of their daughters were in foster care and molested by foster parents during that 18 months, all over a false allegation.
Maybe the CPS should start hiring pedophiles because, you know, they share the same expertise. Oh, I forgot, that's right. They already do.
Okay, my guest is Jim Rothstein. He's a former New York police detective who has worked hard over his life to try to understand what he calls the biggest terrorist problem in our country, and that's the kidnapping of our children. Many of these kids that you see on milk cartons, their pictures on milk cartons, go into these pedophile rings. Jim has documented it, and one of the things he talks about is that none of these investigations in the 30 or 40 years he's been working on this, both publicly and privately, have ever gone to the very top. When you talk about the very top, he means high-level government officials who are protected, as well as high-level Vatican officials who are protected, i.e. a former late Cardinal Spellman, who Jim investigated, who was the head of the Archdiocese in New York. And we talked about that in past shows. But I first wanted to get Jim's comments regarding, I've never asked Jim these questions regarding state agencies like Children and Family Services. We see that a lot of abuse goes on there, Jim. Kids are being, if they're not being taken off the street by kidnappings like you're talking about, they're being somehow corralled into these agencies and then put into foster cares when you find that there's really no abuse in families. Were you ever working on it? Were you ever aware of any problems with Children and Family Services while you were working as a police officer or after?
Yes, we did. Well, during the time I was a police officer, we had a big thing going between Illinois and Texas, and these kids would end up in foster care, and it was a couple hundred of them ended up shipped down to Texas to some social services network there, and they were funneled into the pedophile world. We also had at another instance where in Minnesota they had one where when the kids that were in foster care and stuff ended up in these homes, they had one in a place called Sock Center, a girls' home, and we actually had that they were selling the kids to the pimps to be brought into prostitution around the United States, especially New York City. And I have many, many calls where it seems like there's a manual written on how this works. They get into divorce court or somehow get to where they can grab the kids, and then the kids end up into all kinds of different networks. Some of the people are legitimate, but there's a lot of corruption in that, where people have no clue what they're doing, are taking kids and just sending them to homes that are no better, or in most cases worse than where they came from.
Exactly. And what I wanted to emphasize for the next few minutes is this growing problem in all these child services organizations in each state. And what the real problem began when laws were passed that gave financial incentives to states from the feds based on how many children were in their system. So what they started to do, when you see this pattern, is that they began to just corral as many kids as they can and then trump up abuse charges, fraudulent documents, people lying about what the situation was with the families, just to get kids into their system so that they could keep the system functioning, get more federal money, and then in the case you're talking about, a lot of these kids either end up in abusive foster homes or are funneled into these pedophile rings. Did you ever see, when you were, or since you left the police department, do you see a concerted effort to keep these systems running like this all around the states? And how come people can't stop what's going on with these laws that have been passed that are very wrong?
Well, the people that pass these laws, a lot of them have ulterior motives, and those that don't haven't got a clue what's happening. And people shouldn't allow this. I mean, we should stand up for what's right. And you'll find it's awful hard for people to stand up. Many times they are threatened and, that they're going to go to jail for not taking care of their kids and that. But the most important thing to look here is follow the money. Where is the money going? It just goes on and on. The more money they make, the more they got, and they don't really care what happens to the kids in many cases.
Right. And, I just see stories of abuse all over the country in these systems, people talking on my show regarding how kids were taken away for a simple dog bite, how kids were taken away because one parent argued with another child. In the case of, and these state agencies can just walk in, basically, and take these kids. Now, where they end up is another story. Some I've documented have been abused in these foster homes, some even killed, and others somehow are missing and not on the state rolls. In Florida, it was documented by a group there that thousands of children have not been accounted for over the years. They don't know where they're at.
Well, that's why
I assume they end up in the pedophile rings that you investigate.
Yes, a lot of them do, and I think it would be nice if somebody had the courage to inventory this and do an accounting of each and every child that's ever been in the system and see where they are. I think you'd have one of the biggest scandals in this world. Years ago, they'd just throw them in a foster home of some kind under the guise of an orphanage, and they would, if they were lucky, they survived. And some of probably the worst people I dealt with were victims, and then themselves became the pedophiles and stuff that worked on it that came out of these. And now you've got these kids thrown out, seized by people who have no clue what they're doing, overzealous people who shouldn't even be in the business, and they take these kids, and these kids disappear. Who's watching over that? Nobody. And if you bring it up, you're a bad person.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you've called the biggest terrorist threat in this country not what went on after 9/11, but the kidnapping of our children into these pedophile rings. You've dedicated your life to this. As a police officer, you first started out in Vice in New York, and then you worked your way up as detective. Then you got on the State Crime Task Force to try to eliminate this problem. But tell us why you consider this to be the biggest terrorist threat in our country, even to this day.
Well, that's not hard to figure out. You've got these kids disappearing and dying. It covers quite a different variety of things. And you never, you hear this thing, they're investigating the local authorities, the federal authorities, and then the classic comment, we can't talk about it, it's an ongoing investigation. And people start believing this. And I think I've said this on every show I've ever done with you. The only mother I know that's ever stood up and fought him to the end was Noreen Gosh. She just didn't believe that. She wanted to see what was being done, and when she saw nothing was being done, she understood how the system worked. And it's a classic case. I always refer to her case because of how it worked. And this goes on more and more every day, and any police officer or federal agent who dares investigate these cases to the fullest extent of the law, his career is over with. And what really amazes me why it's terrorism is that people are scared to go ahead and want to know what happened to their kid all across this country. And it's growing and growing and growing, and nothing is being done.
This is the dream of all collectivists, socialists and communists, to break up the family in order to transfer more power over to the state. And if they make a tidy profit along the way, then that's a nice little bonus for them. But unfortunately for the predators, Americans are pulling their kids out of the public education system in droves. The number of children being homeschooled in America has increased by 75% over the past 14 years in all states. The message is being sent to the state and the public re-education system. Our kids are not your property, and we will resist your totalitarian child abuse.